Okay, we're gonna go in. Share entire window. Right. Okay, so this is just something that I put together to open up and lay the foundation for this conversation. All right. Now, I'm not sure why. All right, there we go. So we're gonna start that again because we're having some problems here. Here we go. Okay. All right. So as you can see, African power, the political purpose of African identity in the 21st century. Yeah. Normally I define African and define power and define politics and identity, nationality, and all them thing there. We don't have time for that today. By the way, let me just make sure. Can everybody see? Can you all can see the screen, right? The presentation.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, cool. Just making sure. All right. But we're not going to do that today. Yeah. Another day I'll go into all of that. Suffice to say that most people should be able to get a basic understanding of what each of these terms mean. Yeah. However, what I do want to define is this idea of deconstruction. All right. And it means a method of critical analysis of philosophical and literary language, which emphasizes the internal workings of language and conceptual systems, the relation quality of meaning, and the assumption implicit in forms of expression. Why I have chosen to begin with this idea of deconstruction, and then we're going to get into reconstruction, is the fact that we have identities, yeah, that we operate under at this present moment in time. Yeah. And so people, when you affirm an African identity, there are a number of assumptions that people generally have. There is a dominant narrative around what that means and how such an identity functions in today's world. And so there are those, for example, who would say that you cannot have an African identity because Africa is a continent full of 50 something countries. And there are thousands of ethnicities. And there are thousands of languages. And so even if, this is true, and I'm affirming that this is not necessarily the case, but even if it was the case, why is that something that we accept without an analysis, without an in-depth process of investigating why that is the case and whether indeed this reality as it stands is conducive to our development, as a people? And even before that, is this an organic reality? Is this reality one that Africans have defined for ourselves based upon our own ideas of who we are? Or is this a reality that has been imposed upon us, or a reality that we have adopted or assimilated in response or in reaction to a reality that has been imposed upon us? So I think it's necessary in looking at our identity as a people to engage in the process of deconstruction. What is behind this identity or these realities that are associated with this identity? What undergirds it? How did it come about? Yeah. And it seems to me that there is a significant number of us who are willing, for whatever reason, to accept these narratives without further investigation because it seems to suit whatever political ideology we want to defend at any moment in time. But today we're going to engage in that, at least on a cursory level. And so we're going to start by looking at the research of Babakwesi Pra, in a book called Anthropological Prisms, Studies on African Realities, looking at the extent to which these identities are organic. He says European expansion, i.e. into Africa, not only radically altered the historical mold of non-European societies, but also reconstructed and re-narrated the historical accounts of their societies before the European encounter. Today, the real problem is that too many of us, even in the non-Western world, have adopted the blinkered Western perspectives in our appreciation and understanding of our realities. We look at ourselves through European eyes. Sadly, he goes on to say later on in this particular essay, sadly and significantly, we opened the post-colonial era, with the same albatross of Eurocentric historical periodization, independent African countries and obliging historians quickly invented new histories for their countries. The history of Zambia, the history of Ghana, the history of Ivory Coast, the history of Namibia, etc., etc., appeared for countries which had a few years earlier not existed. And even those cases where they had previously existed during the colonial period, often under different names, they had not existed as identifiable and separate countries before the end of the 19th century. The implications of these historical inventions and the new identities they spawned have had serious implications for Africans since the end of the colonial period. To explain this a little piece, yeah, many of us will be familiar with the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885, where the majority of the borders that we currently understand make up the nation states, yeah, of Africa at the moment, were drawn. All right, around this table there were no Africans. Yes, there were no Africans. We're talking about French, Britain. France, Britain, Portugal, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and there were a couple other European nations apparently who had observer status. Yeah, and there's some speculation about the extent to which America was at the table as well with their observer status, but we won't go too much into that right about now. But this conference created nation states where they previously did not exist, and these nation state creations did not respect the indigenous makeup of our people, our societies, our nations at that time. And so post-colonially, when we were fighting for liberation, what happened was we maintained these colonial constructs that were created for the purpose of facilitating European colonization, and for no other reason. And in fact, it was even worse than that, because in reality, especially where there was a regional confluence, yeah, of these nation states as governed or owned by a European nation. For example, you had the area of French West Africa, which they governed as basically a single expanse, yeah, as one nation, but split it up in terms of how they organize the Africans around those nations, yeah. The same with Britain and so on and so forth. So we now operating in those truncated nation states continue to serve the interest of the people that had created those nation states in the first place. The colonizer cut up the land, invented or created or installed infrastructure to facilitate the extraction of resources from the land. And it just so happens that today, that same scenario is playing itself out, even though our nations are claimed to be independent. And for those of us from the Caribbean, the same reality is presenting itself. And just because you needed an image of a radiant African woman smiling in your life, we've used this particular image. But more importantly, this extract is taken from a essay by a sister by the name of Foluke Adebisi, who is a lecturer at Bristol University. I had the pleasure of meeting the sister in 2018, where we were both speaking at our Pan-African conference at Birmingham City University, and she delivered a paper called Pan-Africanism and Decolonization. So Shakara, but you're talking about nation states, but in reality, the authentic identity for African people on the continent is tribal. Yeah, Africans identify by their tribes. All right, well, let's see what this sister from Nigeria has to say about tribes in terms of deconstructing this idea in our mind. She says, and by the way, the actual subheading in this section is entitled "The Inadequacies of Tribe." She said, it may be presumed that the best way in which to speak of Africa with an anti-colonial script would be through the medium of the tribe. However, the word and concept of tribe carries with it so much of the colonial narrative that it is an unreliable narrator of reality. Tribe is an inexact descriptor. It does not correlate to size or composition or internal homogeneity. It obfuscates reality and history, mythologizing, fetishizing, and reducing African pre-colonial polities, and carries with it the pejoratives of outdated social theory, including primitiveness, savagery. Tribe arises directly out of the racial characterizations which serve as justifications for colonization. Well, that sounds all well and good. That sounds, you know what I'm saying? But can we substantiate this any further? Most African languages have no similar word for tribe. Words used by Africans to self-identify are more similar to people or nation, and you have a reference there if you want to go and do more research. The colonial creation of tribe basically replicates the colonial creation of state. So what she's saying here is that this idea of tribe is not dissimilar from the idea of the nation states that were created in the minds and suiting the purpose of the colonizer, in that it traps the fluid humanity. It traps fluid humanity into cultural and nationalistic borders that they did not choose. It prevents agency, change, and development. It is the starting point of epistemic violence. The creation of the tribe is a substep in the creation of the state, and thus the decolonization of tribe should be part of the decolonization of knowledge of Africa. You know, at this moment, I'm reminded of a saying that I've come across. Yeah, I was listening to a scholar who was doing some work on Islam and the Timbuktu manuscripts, and he quoted, I believe, a Wolof proverb that said something to the degree that a family name has no home. Yeah, which means that basically, or has no, I can't remember. Yeah, was it home or something like that? Anyway, but basically, you're gonna find different family names because people are moving between different groups of people and different distinctions. Yeah, in terms of developing families, right? And clans. Yeah, that was the general point that was being made there. Can we substantiate this even further? Yes, we can. We return to Baba Kwesi Pra in Anthropological Prism Studies on African Reality, where he says, in much the same way that colonialism created chiefs where they did not exist, anthropologists raised sub-nationalities. These are European anthropologists now, understanding that anthropology is inherently a racist discipline of study. Yeah, and sub-ethnicities to conceptual status of tribes. Example, the Dinka in Sudan were conceptually split into Atwat, Gogriel, Boer, etc. The Mandi Moru group was split into Mandi, Lugbara, Olubo, Avukaya, Kaliko in Sudan, Logo, Madi, Lugbara in Uganda, and Logo, Avukaya, Kaliko, Lugbara in Congo Zaire. The theoretical and scientific limitations and distortions of this approach has been partially scrutinized by Marquette, who suggested that, quote, the study of large units in Africa would be no mean contribution to anthropological theory. We don't even discuss African social development, African nation state development in the context of large units. We completely dismiss the fact that there was a Kemet, a Tarseti, a Bakongo, a Ghana, Wagadu, Mali, Songhai, Monomotapa. They completely dismiss that and the context in which those social formations, those nation formations would have come about, because we want to emphasize this concept of tribe, which is inherently colonial, and we don't, again, study large units in Africa. We don't do it for some reason. Why? Why not? Even those of us in the Pan-African, African-centered, conscious scholarship community seem to have missed this. This point cannot be underemphasized. One of the most important challenges facing anthropology in Africa today is to identify optimal cultural units on the basis of which development efforts can be constructed. We've already emphasized the fact that currently the nation states that we currently operate within are not conducive to optimal cultural units on the basis of which development efforts can be constructed. Under colonialism, anthropology became a science of tribes in culture contact and the process of acculturation. Administrative principles which are methodologically constructed along the lines of proliferated divisions facilitated the process of rule, divide and conquer. Segmentary lineages became instruments of colonial administrative policy. So in order, how they what he's explaining here is the extent to which they used clanship systems and created divisions among peoples for the sake of facilitating the colonial order. An example of this is, for example, the elevation of different clans among the Igbo, to chieftaincies, where they didn't have that kind of a centralized system prior to. When I was in Ghana in 2015, I was my brother who lives in Ghana who is Ga. Was explaining to me, because he was going around Accra, and Accra was a city that was founded by the Ga. And he was explaining to me that back in the day, the Ga never had royalty. The community was governed by the Wulome, which is their priesthood system. Okay, it was only when the Europeans came, the Europeans were looking for a king, right? And so kings were invented, for the sake of facilitating communication with the European, the Dutch and the British in particular. All right. Let me go forward some more. So now we get to Reconstruction, and I'm going to move very quickly through this, and then we're going to get into our conversation. So I'm hoping that gives you some pointers in terms of the extent to which what we consider to be the authentic African reality is a fallacy and is in fact a colonial construct. I could go into this idea of the thousands of languages, and then maybe if we have time in the conversation, we'll come back to that. But for now, Reconstruction, the action or process of building or forming something again after it has been damaged or destroyed. Understanding that our organic capacity to define, self-define, and look upon ourselves through our own eyes has been destroyed. Therefore, we need to reconstruct that capacity. The second principle of Kwanzaa is kujichagulia, to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves instead of being defined, named, created for, and spoken for by others. So let's begin. And we, like Shakara, like if you see me for any significant period of time, it's hardly a presentation that goes by where we don't quote Mama Marimba Ani or Baba Amos Wilson. So we're going to get into that a little bit today, kings and queens. Those of us, she says, in the introduction to a beautiful book called Self-Healing Power and Therapy that is written by Baba Kim Bwadende Kiabunseki Fukiao. She says, those of us who have been committed to Pan-African liberation and self-determination have been studying, researching, learning, and teaching about the genius of ancient African civilizations for many years. This has been the ritual process of constructing a paradigm for African-centered reconceptualization. Our approach is continually challenged by those who claim that there is no African worldview, that each African society is fundamentally different, and that the concrete substance of African culture has been destroyed and is now lost within such abstractions as worldview. According to this ideological position, the African connection is non-existent, nothing but a figment of the African nationalist imagination. This is what people are telling us nowadays, kings and queens. All right. But she says in her great book, Let the Circle Be Unbroken, our oppressors have emphasized the loss of language, dress, living patterns, and other tangible and surface aspects of culture, just as they do in discussions of African culture on the continent. They emphasize differences in language and customs, even physique, from one society to another. They do this with good reason. It is an emphasis that serves their objective. Until we learn that it serves our objectives to emphasize the similarities, the ties, the unifying principles, the common threads and themes that bind and identify us all as African, we will continue to be politically and ideologically confused. In essence, the same process that went on the continent of Africa has gone on in the diaspora. The deliberate attempt to sever us and divide us and divorce us from an understanding of ourselves and our culture and our links to each other. All right. But let's delve into this a little bit further. In this great and illustrious book, Civilizational Barbarism by Baba Sheikh Anta Diop, he has a chapter where he's addressing the subject of culture, and he defines culture within three primary domains. The historical, the linguistic, and the psychic. Yeah, the historical, the linguistic, and the psychic. And we're going to hear a little bit from him in terms of the historical dimension of culture right about now. He says, we have said earlier that a people without a historical consciousness is a population. There is a difference between a nation and a population. And that difference is based upon whether that people have a historical conscience or not. The loss of national sovereignty and of historical conscience following a prolonged foreign occupation engenders stagnation and even sometimes regression, disintegration, and the partial return to barbarism. Is that not what we are experiencing right about now? Or have experienced in our history? Regression, stagnation. But then, what would we call an African history? We need to distinguish two levels. The immediate one of the local histories, so dear and deeply lived, in which the African peoples, segmented by diverse exterior forces, the principle of which is colonization, again referring to tribe and nation states, are shriveled up, find themselves trapped and vegetating today. So we deeply live these realities of being Jamaican, of being St. Lucian, Trinidadian, of being Ivorian, South African, Congolese, as opposed to Mukongo. Yeah, we deeply live them. We deeply live these realities of being Nigerian, and whatever else. But within these configurations, we are shriveled up, trapped, and are vegetating right now and today. But we have to understand that this is the reality that we live in at the moment. We must not deny this reality. We must understand it for what it is, deconstruct it, and reconstruct based upon the findings of our deconstruction. So he goes on to say, a second level, more general, further off in time and space, and including the totality of our people, comprises the general history of Black Africa insofar as research permits, restoring it today from a purely scientific approach. Each history is thus pinpointed and correctly situated in relation to the general historical coordinates. Thus, all the continent's history is re-evaluated according to a new unitary standard suited to revive and to cement on the basis of established facts all of the inert elements and of the ancient and historical mosaic. Stick a pin. There are those who say that by affirming African identity, you are disrespecting the uniqueness and individuality of varying different African groups. That this Pan-African ideal of the oneness of Africa does not pay due attention and regard to the beautiful multiplicity of variety among African peoples. I want to know where people who promote this idea in relation to Pan-African ideology have got this from. I want to know, because I have been a Pan-Africanist all my life and I am yet to find it in any significant measure. Baba Sheikh Anta Diop says here, insofar as research permits, yes, restoring today from a purely scientific approach, each history is thus pinpointed, which means that each one is respected and pinpointed and correctly situated in relation to the collective whole. That is the dominant Pan-African sensibility, not a negation of difference and variety and all that beautiful stuff. No, yeah. So tell the true story, all right, and stop misrepresenting the thing. But Baba Sheikh Anta Diop has done more work than most, yeah, in terms of actually detailing and putting together this grand epic history, as he calls it, and he's got it through many different books, but two of the most viable on that subject are The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, The Domains of Matriarchy and Patriarchy in Classical Antiquity, and also Black Africa, The Economic and Cultural Basis for a Federated State. What is the political purpose of African identity? Ultimately, the formation of a federated state. In words, we might use different language depending on our specific political proclivities. Yeah, understanding that there is also variation among Black nationalist Pan-Africanist ideology. Okay, to move forward, and I'm not going to go into all the examples or the rationale and how he seeks to connect African history through making the Nile Valley our classical civilizations and so on and so forth. Yeah, just in brief, he says a consideration of the pre-colonial African family, that of the state, the accompanying philosophical and moral concepts, bearing in mind that we tend to reduce African culture to food, music, dance, clothes, maybe language, yeah, maybe, yeah, language. But we tend not to look at the ontology, yes, the cosmology, the axiology, wherein which we might find the greater foundation for the idea of cultural unity of Black Africa. Yeah, so again, the accompanying philosophical and moral concepts and the like reveals a consistent cultural unity resulting from similar adaptations to the same material and physical conditions of life. I'm going to leave that there and move on very quickly and get into now the current moment. Yeah, what did our more recent ancestors and activists and elders say, and what were they trying to achieve through this affirmation of an African identity? Do you know what? I feel like, no, I'm just going to read very quickly. I was going to skip it, but I'm just going to read very quickly and get to some examples. Yeah. We emphasize the reclamation of the African identity by African peoples and their construction of an African-centered consciousness because we recognize that it was and is the repression of these two factors that made the mental conquest and continuing domination of African peoples possible. This repression out of consciousness of their original identity and the consciousness, I missed my place. This repression this repression out of consciousness of their original identity and consciousness is essentially what is referred to as alienation or self-alienation. When the repression of African identity and consciousness, the refusal to learn of African history and culture are motivated by shame, guilt, anxiety, fear, embarrassment of being identified as an African, most often induced by the political, economic machinations of the dominant whites. When the African person uses these attitudes and feelings to reject his African identity and heritage, the identity and heritage being an objective fact, whether he accepts it or not, then we refer to that person as self-hating or self-alienating. The general attitude is one of self-hatred. In being ignorant of, self-alienating, or rejecting his objective historical cultural identity, self-hatred, the person is compelled to assume a new identity, albeit a false one, or suffer identity confusion, ambivalence, or lack of self-definition, usually characterized by a chronic search for purpose and meaning. But what I want to focus on here is this part where he says, most often induced by the political economic machinations of the dominant whites. Yeah. And then it linked that to this idea that we are forced to take on a new identity. So we live in a society that rewards us for assimilating the identity of the colonizer and rejecting the identity of African. And so we find a justification within that context because the colonizer has created a society for that purpose, to fulfill that purpose. But some of us think that we're liberating ourselves and we're thinking intelligently by propagating the idea that we should do this in the first place right now because it is most politically expedient to be British rather than African, or British primarily and African supplementarily. How? In what sense? Even Non-Africans understand the thing. This is taken from a book by the name of Tribes, How Race, Religion, and Identity Determine Success in the New Global Economy. What is the political purpose of an African identity? This European called Joel Kotkin, who happens to be a Jew, is identifying in this book the global power dynamics and the nations or the systems of nationhood, the ideals of nationhood that are either have assumed power or are ascending in the power dynamic, and what are the features, the characteristics, yes, through which they are achieving this global power, yeah? And he identifies three major components. One, strong identity, that's the first thing, yes? A sense of mutual dependence, that helps the group to adjust to the changes in global economic and political order without losing its essential unity. Two, global network. Having a global network is an essential component to political and economic power in today's world, at least according to this assessment, based on mutual trust that allows a tribe to function collectively beyond the confines of national or regional borders. But yet we want to just be black people in Jamaica, black people in Britain, black people in Nigeria, black people in South Africa, unconnected, and we expect in a globalized world economy that runs transnationally to assume power in that reality. And we think we're thinking intelligently. And three, technical knowledge. A passion for technical knowledge and other knowledge from all possible sources, combined with an essential open-mindedness that fosters rapid cultural and scientific development, critical for success in the late 20th century. That last one is another subject for another time. So finally, I just want to give a few examples of attempts, yeah, to affirm what people try to do politically, yes, or try to produce politically through this understanding of an African identity. What you see on your screen is a picture of two men. One, the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, and two, Baba Patrice Lumumba. Cut a long story short, Baba Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah comes to power in Ghana in 1957 and really is the first black nation to achieve this thing called independence. And he begins a program almost immediately of African unity, not just on the continent, but with the diaspora. One of the things that he does is he tries to form a union with the nation of Togo. The president to be Olympia in Togo was not too willing to go along with the program. So eventually in 1958, he signs the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union with Modibo Keita and Sekou Touré. The idea being that in making ourselves independent, we should be no respecters of these colonial borders. And so he wanted to begin by creating a West African Union or a West African Federation, and anybody who was willing to come on the program with him, he roped into the program. So Modibo Keita and Sekou Touré of Guinea and Mali, respectively, were willing. So the Ghana-Guinea-Mali Union was signed in 1958. Then, when the Congo was made independent, yeah, in 1960, with Baba Patrice Lumumba as the prime minister, a secret agreement was signed in 1960 between these two men and their nations. Why secret? Because they understood that the colonizers were still about, and that Belgium and France in particular had significant interest in the Congo. Yes, and so they wanted to keep that one under wraps until they were in a better position to bring it forward and make it public. And the agreement was signed, and it says the president of the Republic of Ghana and the prime minister of the Republic of the Congo have given serious thought to the idea of African unity, and with the approval of the governments and peoples of their respective states, have decided to establish among themselves a union of African states. The union will have a republican constitution within a federal framework. The federal government will be responsible for foreign affairs, defense, the issues of common currency, economic planning and development. There would be no customs barriers between any parts of the federation. There would be a federal parliament and a federal head of state. The capital of the union should be in Leopoldville, which was in Congo. Yeah. Any states of territory in Africa, sorry, I should say any state or territory, forgive the typo, in Africa is free to join this union. The above union presupposes Ghana's abandonment of the Commonwealth. Oh no, Ghana can't abandon the Commonwealth. Oh no, Jamaica can't abandon the Commonwealth. We're hearing some good noises from Barbados at the moment about abandoning the Commonwealth and this preposterous situation of the monarch of England being the head of state in nations like Jamaica and Barbados all till now, with a governor general on the land. And when you want to deploy your army, you have to seek the permission of the Governor General, who operates on the authority of the British monarch. Foolishness. This was signed in 1960 by the Sergeant for Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba. What happened in 1961? Baba Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. Yes, by a CIA-backed coup, by an MI6-backed coup. And in 1966, the same forces that are responsible for assassinating Baba Patrice Lumumba facilitated a coup in the nation of Ghana. Gonna move swiftly on. I ain't gonna say nothing. Just listen.
Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States, but they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-Americans in the United States to be organized, but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba and those in Brazil and those in Venezuela and those throughout the Caribbean and Haiti and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride. And as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together. And your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat. More threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.
You see the picture of Baba Patrice Lumumba on the wall behind Omawale Malcolm X, who is speaking in 1964. December, I believe, he's being interviewed by some students. I believe the students are from Congo, yeah? And so he's speaking in the context of developing the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And in 1963, he travels to the continent. I'm not going to read this, but this is just him speaking at the Audubon Ballroom in December of 1964. Basically speaking about the fact that he was able to get the then developing Organization of African Unity to pass a resolution of support for the plight of Africans in America on the basis of the fact that they are our African brothers and sisters, so to speak. Yeah, you can find that in a speech that was delivered at the Audubon Ballroom in December of 1964. For those who want to actually read it, I'm not going to read it for the sake of time. Again, moving on, not going to speak, just listen.
The real reason for all of this hostility is because
No, sorry, I should actually speak on this one because some people may not actually know who this is. Yeah, this is Maurice Bishop. Yes, Maurice Bishop was the Prime Minister of revolutionary Grenada. Yeah, between 1979 and 1983, Grenada was in the midst of a revolution. This is Maurice Bishop speaking at Hunter College in the United States of America in June of 1983, and he's about to tell the people packed at Hunter College about a secret report that he received that came from an American intelligence agency.
The real reason for all of this hostility is because some perceive that what is happening in Grenada can lead to a new socio-economic and political path of development. They give all kinds of reasons and excuses, some of them credible, some utter rubbish. There's an interesting one that we saw very recently in a secret report of the State Department. I want to tell you about that one, so you can reflect on that one. That secret report made this point, that Grenada is different to Cuba and Nicaragua, and the Grenada Revolution is in one sense even worse, using their language, than the Cuban and Nicaraguan revolutions, because the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada speaks English and therefore can communicate directly to the people of the United States. I can see from your applause, sisters and brothers, that you agree with the report. But I want to tell you what that same report also said, and said that also made us very dangerous. And that is that the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada are predominantly black. They said that 95% of our population is black, and they had a correct statistic. And if we have 95% of predominantly African origin in our country, then we can have a dangerous appeal to 30 million black people in the United States. Now, that aspect of the report clearly is one of the most sensible ones.
Few months later, in fact, this month is the anniversary of the assassination of Baba Maurice Bishop. Yeah, killed. After which, the Americans were already planning an invasion of Grenada. They invaded the island following, and interestingly enough, in this same year, I'm forgetting the month, yeah, but Thomas Sankara visits America and speaks in Harlem and speaks on the assassination of Maurice Bishop. Also, just a bit of history there, kings and queens, but you heard exactly what he had to say. So I'm going to conclude it there. I just wanted to give some examples of how brothers and sister activists on a mass scale have used this idea of African identity for political power. As you can tell, I have dealt with a lot of macro and not a lot of micro, but that was intentional, because now we're going to get into a conversation with my brother and my sister in terms of delving into this subject a little bit more. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
So I hope that laid the foundation well in a lot of ways. But